Welcome, welcome, welcome all. I am Mr. M and this is my PTA, that's Parent Teacher Advice channel. Today we're looking at a topic that frequently divides educators, parents and social media commentators: behavior management in schools. So this has all come around because I saw a video on my For You TikTok page from a retired head teacher who was asking the question, why do schools, despite recent research, why do schools insist on putting consequences before connection? In fact, this is the video right now. Let's have a look at it.
Someone please explain to me why schools are leading with consequences. It's 2026, we know better. Decades of research telling us that connection before correction is more effective, that a dysregulated brain can't receive a consequence, that relationship is the intervention, and yet behaviour policies are still built on sanctions. Staff training is focused on consequences. Children are being corrected before anyone has connected. And then everyone wonders why behaviour is getting harder. It's getting harder because we keep doing the same things. Connection before correction. It's not new and it's not soft. It's what evidence has been telling us for years. We just haven't been listening.
Connection before correction. It's a phrase that has garnered significant traction in educational discourse, and this creator makes a compelling argument regarding trauma-enforced practice. However, when we look at the reality of modern schooling, the reality is a little more complex than simply choosing correction over connection or consequences. Today, we're going to unpack both sides of this argument using psychological research, education pedagogy, and historical precedent. Let's begin by validating the creator's central premise. Behaviorally, she's entirely correct. Attempting to reason with a highly distressed child is usually futile. However, this is based on the work of Dr. Daniel Siegel on the triune brain and Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Bruce Perry's neurosequential model, I'll put it on the screen, which suggests that during periods of high stress, the amygdala activates and effectively overrides the prefrontal cortex. But see, we need to be precise about the neuroscience. You might often hear people say that during a meltdown, a child's reptilian brain takes over and their thinking brain goes offline. I've said it myself. I've been in schools and I've said it myself. But modern neuroscience shows us that the brain is far more integrated than that. The prefrontal cortex doesn't have an off switch. Instead, what happens during acute stress is a shift in neural priorities. When a child is highly dysregulated, their brain prioritizes speed and survival over slow, complex deliberation. Their working memory and cognitive load are entirely consumed by managing a heightened state of psychological arousal. Therefore, the claim that a dysregulated brain can't receive a consequence is a slight mischaracterization. The brain receives the consequence, but in a state of high alarm. It processes that consequence as an escalating threat rather than a logical learning opportunity. This triggers further defensive behavior. This is where relational pedagogy is correct. An adult must first help the child co-regulate by establishing a calm environment and ensuring the child feels safe. The adult helps lower the psychological arousal. This helps the brain to shift its resources back towards the networks responsible for logic and reflection. Only then can a consequence be understood as a boundary rather than an attack. So if establishing a connection is neurologically necessary to de-escalate an individual, why do schools still build their overarching behavior policies around sanctions? To understand this, we must look at the classic psychology and the logistical reality of the classroom. The foundation of traditional school discipline is behaviorism, specifically B.F. Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning states that the observable behavior is shaped by its consequences. If a positive behavior is reinforced, it increases. If a negative behavior is met with a consistent, undesirable consequence, it decreases over time. Now, while critics argue that this is an outdated model for individual trauma, it remains highly effective for establishing baseline social norms across a large population, which brings us to the pedagogical reality of scalability. A primary or secondary school teacher is often managing a room of 30 or more pupils. If a student becomes highly disruptive, the teacher can't always pause the learning of the other 29 children to engage in a 20-minute co-regulation exercise. Education advisors such as Tom Bennett argue that clear, predictable consequences are essential, not just for the individual, but to protect the right to a safe learning environment for the majority. Consequences provide a necessary boundary. They act as a deterrent and communicate to the wider student body that the classroom is a safe, secure, and ordered space. We must also acknowledge the historical precedent for the British education system. For centuries, schools operated under the legal doctrine of in loco parentis, which in the place of the parent. Historically, this permitted severe punitive measures, including corporal punishment, which was only fully banned in all UK schools in 1998. When physical punishment was rightly abolished, schools replaced it with a hierarchy of administrative consequences: warnings, detentions, isolation, and exclusion. The physical architecture, the timetabling, and the legal safeguarding frameworks of schools were built around this compliance model, pivoting an entire national institution from compliance-based model to purely rational, trauma-informed models is a monumental task. It requires lower staff-to-student ratios, extensive psychiatric training for standard classroom teachers, and funding for pastoral care that currently the system just doesn't possess. So where does that leave us? Are schools wrong to use consequences, as the video suggests? The reality is that connection and consequences are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they rely on one another. A consequence delivered without a foundational relationship is just punishment and often breeds resentment. However, a relationship without boundaries is simply enabling poor behavior. The most effective schools use a blended approach. They train staff in de-escalation and trauma-informed practices to reduce the baseline misbehavior and help students regulate their emotions, but they also maintain clear, logical consequences to ensure safety and uphold the community standards, which are necessary for learning to take place. So to answer the original poster's question, schools are not leading with consequences because they're ignorant of the research. They're using them because managing the emotional and academic needs of hundreds of children simultaneously requires a structured framework of boundaries. Connection is the goal, but consequences remain a necessary mechanism for safety. But what do you think? If you have experiences on how your child's school manages this balance, I'd love to read them in the comments below. I know a lot of schools, particularly secondary schools, seem to weigh very heavily on the consequence side of things. I am aware of that. I know children that get detentions for the slightest of things. So I understand that particularly secondary schools seem very heavily weighted on the consequences before the connections. But what's your experience? Yeah, also, since you've made it this far, I'll come clean with you. I'll come clean. I'm on holiday this month, so I'm trying to do as much as I can to get myself a backlog so I can actually have a bit of a holiday. So if this has seemed a bit rushed or a bit less polished, that would be why. I hope you can forgive me, but I do have a family as well. And, you know, have you seen outside? It's lovely. So I'm off to record the next episode of this. I'm going to edit everything all in one bunch. Yeah. Until next time, look after yourselves, check in on your friends, and remember, you can do this. You're awesome.